Hello and welcome to the Just Here in the Dark podcast with me, your host, Sean. As always, you can check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Spotify, and YouTube. And for more content, you can check out the Just Here in the Dark podcast Instagram page where I'll be putting out strange short stories and other weird, creepy, and strange content. Also, if you're here for the giveaway or the explanation, that will be left at the end of the podcast. Also, please like, share, subscribe, and rate 5 stars, of course, on your particular streaming platform. But with all that being said, without any more further ado, let's get into our first story. This following story comes to us from various sources. Cohen and Stephanos were avid fishermen and would go fishing at an area not far offshore. The two boys would routinely check in with their parents every couple of hours. Stephanos' grandfather told reporters that his grandson had operated the boat about 20 times and that family members were comfortable with him operating the boat. After a week prior to the boys' disappearance, Stephanos had been stopped by a Marine patrol officer for a routine check, and all safety equipment mandated by Florida law was aboard the boat. On July 23, 2015, Cohen sent a message to another friend via Instagram that read, "Me and Austin are crossing the Bahamas tomorrow. Come with us, we wouldn't check in." Another friend reportedly spoke to Stephanos about traveling to the Bahamas prior to their departure, with Stephanos saying that the weather was too rough. Cohen reportedly asked his stepfather that night if he could borrow his GPS to use on Stephanos' boat. The night prior to their disappearance, Cohen and Stephanos spent the night together at Stephanos' home before planning to go fishing the next morning, although Cohen had told a friend that they were planning to head to the Bahamas. On the morning of July 24th, 2015, Cohen and Stephanos traveled to the Jupiter Islands Marina to go fishing on an 18-foot single-engine 1978 Seacraft that was registered to Stephanos' mother. They were last seen at the Jib and the Yacht Club and Marina, where they spent about $100 on gas, and Stephanos texted his parents about 11:25 a.m., and they left the marina sometime before noon. Shortly after they left, a line of thunderstorms were documented moving towards the area. The National Weather Service issued a special marine warning that warned of heavy rains and winds potentially in excess of 40 miles per hour. It is believed that the boys were overtaken by the storm, and Stephanos' cell phone was disconnected from the internet around 1:15 p.m. His last social media post was from his Snapchat account, with one of his posts being the boys on the boat with fishing poles and a message stating, "Peace out, Jupe," which friends claim meant the boys were going to the Bahamas. A friend told reporters that another post from that day from Stephanos' account was a video of a fast-moving storm headed towards the boat, with the commentary, "We're fucked." This following story comes to us from thetruecrimefiles.com. It was a normal Christmas Eve in 1945 for the Theodder family in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Except for the eldest son being away in the Army, all 9 of his siblings were enjoying the holidays at home with their parents, George and Jenny. When it was time for the children to go to bed, 5 of the children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 6, asked for special permission to stay up late. Jenny, the mother, told them they could stay up a little later, but they had to remember to take care of the farm animals, turn out the lights, and close the curtains and lock the front doors before going to bed. George and Jenny and 4 of their other children then went to bed, with the eldest daughter falling asleep on the couch. Later, in the early hours of the 25th, the phone rang. Jenny left the first floor bedroom she shared with George and the baby and went into the hall to answer it. A woman was on the other end of the phone, and it sounded like there were several people talking in the background. The woman asked Jenny for someone Jenny didn't know. Jenny told the woman that she had the wrong number. The woman laughed strangely and quickly hung up. Jenny may have puzzled momentarily after the strange call in the middle of the night, but her focus quickly shifted to the fact that the house was quiet, but all the lights were still on. The drapes were open, the front door was unlocked. Jenny just assumed that the 5 children who had stayed up late had forgotten. She closed up the house and returned to bed. Back in bed, Jenny was drifting back into sleep when she heard what sounded like an object falling on the roof and then rolling down alongside the house. And then she smelled smoke. It was approximately 1:30 a.m. on Christmas Day. She shook George awake and ran to the door of the bedroom. The hallway was filled with smoke and flames covered the stairway leading up to the children's bedroom. George and Jenny shouted up the stairs for everyone to get out of the house quickly. Once out front, a head count showed that 5 children who stayed up late were not outside with the rest of the family. The flames grew quickly and blocked George from going back into the house. Thinking the only way to get the 5 children out would be to get them out through the top floor window, he raced around the side of the house where a ladder always stood. The ladder was gone. Panicking, George thought that if he could move one of his trucks next to the side of the house, he could stand on the top and help the 5 children out the window. He ran to the first one truck and then to the other, only to find that they wouldn't start, although they had both been working perfectly the previous day. All George and Jenny and the 4 children who had managed to flee the house could do was watch the fire ravage the house. The fire was brutal and reduced the house to ashes in less than an hour. Nothing was left but charred timbers, rubble in the basement. Allegedly, because the fire chief could not drive the fire truck, and because it was a holiday, it wasn't until 8 a.m., hours after the fire had burnt itself out, that the fire truck appeared. Local police followed the firemen to the scene and did a cursory investigation. The coroner was consulted, and it was determined that the 5 children had undoubtedly perished in the fire and that the fire had been caused by faulty wiring. But George and Jenny were not satisfied with that explanation. They wanted an in-depth investigation to thoroughly explain how, among other things, faulty wiring could have caused the fire when several lights were working perfectly during the actual fire. They suspected that there was something more to be discovered, and they demanded answers. And the answers that started trickling in supported George and Jenny's suspicion. First and foremost, there were no human remains found anywhere in the rubble, and nobody had noticed the distinct smell of burning flesh during the fire or afterwards. Sifting through all of the ashes produced no skeletons. Jenny would later find out from a local crematorium that it took at least 2 hours at a temperature much higher than that of a house fire for skeletons to disintegrate. But the fire at the Theodder home burned for less than an hour. There should have been 5 skeletons amongst the ashes. It just didn't make sense. George and Jenny began collecting bits of strange evidence that pointed away from the explanation the authorities had given them. They came across a bus driver who stated that he had seen what he described as fireballs being thrown onto the roof of the house. Could this have been the noise that Jenny heard that night? A woman, somewhat familiar with the Theodder family, stated to have seen clearly the 5 children go by in a stranger car while the fire was blazing. At a dinner 50 miles west of Fayetteville, a waitress would later say that she had served breakfast to the 5 children on Christmas morning, but she couldn't recall how many adults were with them. As word spread and photographs of the children were shown in the vicinity, a woman said that she saw 4 of the children in the company of 4 adults at a hotel in South Carolina. These glimpses gave George and Jenny hope and caused them to pursue their own investigations and forensic experiments. Jenny burned chicken bones in an oven to see if they could be completely destroyed by a fire in 45 minutes. The bones remained intact. George heard of another house that had burned to the ground that clearly featured complete skeleton amongst the debris. Armed with these facts, George and Jenny went back to the police and demanded to have the fire further investigated, but the police refused, claiming that the coroner's inquiry determined that no crime had been committed. So George and Jenny continued alone in trying to find answers. Time passed, and George and Jenny and their surviving children continued their search. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny got an envelope in the mail. It had been mailed from the city of Kentucky. There was no return address, just the postmark. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back was written, "Louis Sauter, I love brother Frankie." Authorities thought it was some kind of cruel hoax, but George and Jenny thought the photograph looked exactly how Louis would have looked as an adult. There were multiple similarities. Once again, hopeful, they hired a private investigator to go to the city of Kentucky to track down the photo's sender and/or the young man himself. The investigator left West Virginia with his fee and was never heard from again. The 1968 photo was the last possible evidence that ever came to light. George would die in 1969. And Jenny would die 20 years later. They never believed that their 5 beloved children died in that fire early one Christmas morning. All right, so I'm going to end the podcast off here. And first, I'm going to get into why I had missed last week's podcast. And there's no crazy, wild stories, nothing epic. It just was me really just sitting and taking the time and thinking about if I wanted to continue the podcast, knowing that now I had to pay for my podcast to be on the Spreaker platform, which is fine. And I didn't want to just rush into it and just pay the money, even though it's not a significant amount. It's not a lot of money, but I just wanted to think about it just to really know if I was going to dedicate myself to the podcast, knowing that it takes a lot to find stories. I gotta promote and everything else, editing and a lot of other stuff that takes place in crafting a podcast. So, especially by yourself. So I just wanted to take my time and really think if I was going to be dedicated to putting out the podcast consistently and doing all the other things that it takes to continue to put out these podcasts. All right, so now we can get into the giveaway and the reason we're having the giveaway. The reason we're having the giveaway is because we have now reached 100 listens, 100 downloads. And that is not a crazy number, especially to some platforms doing millions, hundreds of thousands, and so on and so forth. But when I started this podcast, I had no expectations about numbers or how long, it would take me to reach this type of goal, or just putting it out consistently or not consistently, but putting it out nonetheless and just letting people listen to it. If you like it or if you don't, let me know, critique it, message me, comment. It's all fine with me. But the main thing is that when I put it out, I had no expectations about numbers, and for it to reach 100 downloads means a lot to me. And, I just want to show my appreciation and say thank you so much. It really means a lot. And I want to show you my appreciation by giving back to the people who have been supporting the podcast this far. We will be